Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Cinema Café. I'm John Nine. I'm a senior programmer here at the festival, and I oversee this off-screen program, which I hope you will check out over the next few days. We have some great movies on screen and some great conversations off screen. And that's what we're here to do today. I want to, on behalf of the festival, I want to thank our two guests. We have Chiwetel Ejiofor, who, of course, you know his work as an actor. He is here as a writer and director of the film The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, which is in our premieres section, and it is a fantastic film. I hope some of you have seen it, and if you haven't, you should go see it. And Boots Riley, of course, the director of the film Sorry to Bother You, which was part of the Sundance Labs, and also a great hit from last year. And it is worth noting, as we will get into, that one of the advisors that Boots had at the Screenwriting and Directing Labs was none other than Chiwetel Ejiofor. I want to thank our partnership with the New York Times Talk series. Thank you so much for taking the conversations that happen here off the mountain so that everybody else can participate as well. Thanks to Kyle Buchanan for moderating. And I want to introduce my cohort at Times Talks, the creative director, Michelle Gray.
Thank you, John. It's been a distinct pleasure for Times Talks. This is our 8th consecutive year partnering with Sundance and Cinema Café, and we're very excited to be back here. This is our 3rd talk. Don't miss tomorrow's talk with Jenny Slate and Ed Helms as well. For those of you who are not familiar with Times Talks is a live, New York Times live conversation series which pairs New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest minds from the cultural arts. Moderating today's talk and discussion is Kyle Buchanan, the cultural reporter and carpetbag columnist for the New York Times. And so without much further ado, I'd love to introduce Kyle Buchanan, Boots Riley, and Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Thank you. Well, let's begin with that enticing bit of information that we heard in the intro. Boots, when you were here at Sundance Labs developing Sorry to Bother You, Chiwetel was at one point your advisor. What do you guys remember about that experience?
I just remember the rehearsals, but I remember the rehearsals happening, and he has this sort of thing that he does with his eyebrow when he's interested, but you don't know whether it's skeptical or supportive because we're running the rehearsals and he's raising the one eyebrow like this. But then he's thinking of something very everything that I learned at the labs, from Chiwetel to any of the advisors, because I knew I was going to make the movie. I kept that and used it when I shot the film. So things that he told me about, just hearing him talk to the actors, because, I was like, do you have anything you want to say to them? I mean, I used that as my own knowledge and repeated that back on my own set as if I knew it. So, yeah.
And Chiwetel, I mean, you were in on the ground floor of Boots' screenplay. What do you remember about it then? What was your first reaction, and what advice could you give him?
I just remember Boots just being, I just remember Boots being very open to it. Just very open to all the thoughts. I was just very focused on what you were doing. I just thought it was so interesting, innovative, exciting. It was obviously a terrific script, and then trying to see how you can, how I could maybe help. And just the way that it was just the way that the dynamics were playing out with the different actors, in the scenes that we were looking at. Yeah. And so and I just remember, Boots being very open to that and being just being appreciative of it and engaging with it and not feeling defensive about it, and and just really, I thought that was really useful. And so I came away from that just knowing that he was going to make something really special. It just seemed very clear that he was right in it.
If you haven't seen Chiwetel's film, as I was watching it, something interesting struck me. It's about this boy, William, who has this real aptitude for science, and he's trying to convince everybody around him that he can build this windmill that can save his family, save the crop during a really dry season. He sees this windmill in his head. He knows it will work. The hard part is convincing everybody else to see his vision, share it, and not say no, because it's so easy to say no. And it struck me while watching, this is exactly the process of getting your first film made.
Yeah.
And so what I really want to talk to you guys about is that hard road to production, where it starts with an idea, or maybe even before that, starts with the belief that you can step outside a career, a persona, an idea that you've cultivated for yourself, that other people have put on you, and say, no, I can do this different thing and convince you. So tell me, Chiwetel, maybe first, at what point in your career did you think to yourself, I want to be a director?
I mean, I didn't really have that thought in a way. I just read this book and I thought this would make a really great and important and hopefully kind of a profound film. I felt like it was a real testament of our time, not just a time and a place in Malawi in Africa, but a time and a place right now across the world. I thought it had resonances for the world, a global story, and I thought William's story was, and his ingenuity and his inventiveness and his dedication was deeply inspiring to me, and so I wanted to see if there was a way of getting that out there. And then I couldn't really figure out, I mean, for me, it's always nice as an actor when you have that sense of like, I don't know, I want to covet this part, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like if I think I can bring something to it that nobody else can bring to it, then that is really exciting to me, if, that kind of makes a bit of the difference to me. And I had that kind of feeling with the book. I was like, if I don't make this, if I don't start pushing to make this, then there's some chance it won't get made ever. And I don't want that to happen. So I want to start trying to figure out how I can adapt this book and make the film.
But to do that, you've got to convince the people who really live these lives and who have this book to let you do it. And while you have an impressive filmography as an actor, this is a first time for you to say, okay, I know you've seen what I can do, but I know that I can do this thing that you haven't seen me do. So how do you approach that? What was your first meeting, pitch, email where you really made your opening salvo?
Well, I spoke to, I started off really speaking to William Kamkwamba and Tom Riley, who was working with William at the time. And, I mean, there's a few things. There was some interest in the book, but it wasn't like there was this huge, it's not like it was in this kind of huge bidding war with anybody, So there was an avenue. There was something there was an opening there to get in and to try and talk to them about what I felt the story was about and how I would approach it. And that kind of, I suppose, was the beginning of that whole chapter. That I was that I spoke very honestly about what moved me about the book, what I considered when I was reading the book, and the film that I wanted to make about it, which then started to center in not just on the construction of this woman, but on this family, and that's what moved me, most, is this family and this community, and these dynamics in this place, and this very rich cultural place, and trying to bring some of that to a sort of global platform.
Bruce, I think I read that you directed short films in college. At that point, was it...
If you want to call them that.
Well, what do you want to call them?
I mean, that was like, let's look at this cup and then flash garbage cans in there.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I went to San Francisco State, and at the time, they really were focused on either documentary or experimental film. And that's what and you could do narrative at the time, but you weren't going to get a lot of help in that. So I was just messing around with a camera, I guess.
Yeah, but you have to have learned something from doing that, right? I mean,
I think what I learned, yes, I'm not writing that off, but that was also, that was a long time ago. So I did use that to get investors to believe in me. Like, hey, I went to San Francisco State for school, but I think the thing that prepared me the most was, I've been a music producer for 20 years, and with that, it's really, for me, my way of doing that is something where I'm working with amazing people, like musicians that know way more about music than I do. The best bass player in the world, the drummer that thinks he's the best drummer in the world, and guitar player who's ADD and sends you the all caps text all the time. And although they know more about music than I do, I have to be the one with the vision, because otherwise it'll be shit. And I have to not only say that, hey, I'm hiring you to complete this vision, I have to get them to buy into it, be able to communicate that to them, and also know what I want from them. And also know that even though the guitar player is the expert on guitar playing, that every song doesn't have to have a guitar solo, right? And that's his bias from being the expert at guitar playing. So I have to be that person that puts and then I also have to know when the bass player has a way better idea than I have. And I have to put the song first and put my ego in the completion of that song, as opposed to in all these little things. So I think that sort of way of working is kind of how you complete anything. You could probably apply that to building a house. You could apply that to making a film. And so I think those things helped me more. Definitely going to film school helped me know a few things, because a lot of people at film school, most of them ended up working for ILM or Lucasfilm, and which is great places, but I didn't want to just do that. I knew that I wanted to do my own thing.
But when did you know, or when did you decide that you could make that into a reality after having worked in music for so long? Was there just this voice in the back of your head that got louder and more insistent?
Yes, and it kind of had a real scratchy thing, and when it wasn't telling me to kill people.
Probably a better channeling of your energy.
I think my attitude with a lot of things and how to get things done has a lot to do with my time as an organizer. I've been in disciplined revolutionary organizations where the concept of dialectical materialism is talked about, and without going into that, one of the things that you can figure out from dialectical materialism, and it sounds like it's just basically says everything changes and you can be part of that change. It's really simple, but the idea is that if there's something over here that you want to do and you're over here, you just have to identify what steps it is and complete those steps, right? And so there's the variable of how long will that take. For me, it took 7 years from the time that I started writing the script to getting it done. And so I had the desire to do it for years. So, but I think I just decided that I was going to stop saying that I was going to do it and then sit down and write a script. And by that time, I had to justify it to everybody why I was like not touring and I was writing. And, because the coup is not a big group. So we have to, since we get paid pennies, we got to go collect a lot of pennies. And when you stop touring, everybody gets mad because your agents are like, you're going to make your fee go down. You're going to do all this kind of stuff. And so I focused on getting that done. And so by the time you're finished justifying it to people, you've convinced yourself even more that it could get done. And so, yeah.
Well, I want to talk about that writing process because it's perhaps the most solitary part of this. And Chiwetel, after you had, convinced them to let you make this, you still have to sit down and write it. I don't know if you'd written screenplays before that haven't been produced, but what was your experience of beginning it?
Well, for me, there was, obviously with an adaptation, you've got this basis, and there's a great basis, this great solid foundation in this book. And then you've got a kind of, and I did a sort of first draft that was based heavily on a kind of a sort of straight adaptation of the book with some structural changes. But then what I realized that I had to do more fully is to experience the place myself, and to really get an understanding of Malawi. And so that process then took me over to Malawi and back and forth to Malawi over several years, it turned out in the end, to spend time with William Kamkwamba, to spend time with his family, to understand the culture, the very rich and very specific cultural dynamics that happen in Malawi, because of its, obviously like anywhere else, it's extraordinarily interesting and unique history. And so that started, I was able to then start to think in terms of visualizing the story as a director whilst writing the screenplay. Because I knew that I wanted to shoot the film at the exact locations that the events happened in the book. So I could go back to London and carry on writing and carry on working it with those things in mind, and begin the process of working with the Chichewa, the language in Malawi, which was also going to be heavily featured in the film, to make sure that I wanted to create a kind of teleportation experience. I wanted audiences to be able to really go in and feel and be centered in this place, and that had to start within the writing of it, And then I think for me, it's for me in this process, it was kind of looking at the wider implications and seeing how I could layer in what I felt to be the kind of important global dynamics that are part of the story. The sort of neoliberal economic situation, the nature of environmentalism, and obviously that's a massive part of it, and the education themes. The family dynamics, and playing off that and understanding it from my own perspective and my own family perspective, and so trying to write a script that held all of me in it and as much of Malawi as I could put in it as well.
But it must be an interesting thing to be an actor who writes, because you have an intimate understanding of what makes a scene work, not just when you're filming it, not just when we see it, but when you're in it, when you're playing it. I have to imagine that, when you're writing these back and forth dialogue scenes, that's got to, be a thing that you can bring to bear on it.
Yeah, totally. I was playing out those scenes like crazy. That was half the thing. If you'd seen me in my room, it was like, it was going nuts. But that's part of it, trying to find how it's going to work in playing it, being deeply inside of it, being all the characters, doing all the things, and then letting that go, and letting a lot of that go, It was interesting for me as well, because going into directing and trying to communicate ideas, it's kind of where you started, trying to communicate ideas as a director, from a place that I've not really tried to communicate ideas before from. And trying to sort of get actors and, in Maxwell's case, a young actor, and some people who hadn't acted before, and trying to communicate these things, but also being able to utilize, by being in the film, ways of just changing the temperature of a scene from the inside, and so trying to sort of rely on the actor side of myself to be a director without communicating that verbally, It was an interesting process. It was a steep learning curve in all those dynamics. I'd love to hear about your experience of just communicating ideas to actors and how that.
Well, what I did beforehand, partly because of the access to Sundance and just me knocking on people's doors, I would always go to directors and say, "How do you talk to actors?" And I'd be like, "Give me an example." Give me, and I'd be taking these things. I also read, a lot of this is just me like finding the information and getting I read this book, Acting for Directors, and which was the stuff that's talked about in there is very much reinforced at Sundance, and which just has to do with just getting people to come from inside themselves, and as opposed to saying, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, you need to be more angry when you say that," you might say, "Stab them with that line,"
Nice.
or
Oh, I like that.
So things like that, or we also did just kind of experimented to kind of get things looser. We did silent takes, like the whole scene with just no dialogue, and I was able to use that to like cut off lines when I wanted to just edit out lines and stuff. But yeah, I got a lot of. That's how I did. I got a lot of information. I watched a lot of behind the scenes making of things like on YouTube. I really just went in there. There's a website called mentorless.com, and I just went on there and found and it's like an aggregator, and it had a lot of behind the scenes things, and some of them, if they're good, you can see what the director is doing. So it was like, you know, shadowing somebody sometimes. And there's a really good one called The Faces of January or something with Viggo Mortensen, and it just actually is the whole movie, but with the camera behind the scenes.
Oh, wow.
And it has a score and everything in there. So I just did that, and I also just took some of what I do with musicians as well, like how do I get someone into feeling this thing? But then also just communicating the idea to everybody, to the team, took me that's where the time came in handy, because I had like lots of photographs for every scene, lots of references, lots of texture, like down to like, this is the way the wall should look, like we used a picture of Bob Marley's bedroom for Cassius's bedroom, things like that, and just trying to get people hyped on. That's kind of what I do, is I get people hyped on the ideas. So you got to get your department heads to feel what you're feeling, and for me, that's communication that's not only verbal but with references and going back and forth.
I know that at the labs, there's table reads, there's trying to get a scene on its feet, and sometimes they give you really big people for that. I think I read that there was a Sorry to Bother You table read that Glenn Close was involved in.
Oh.
And I got to know who Glenn Close played in the
No.
Sorry to Bother You.
She wasn't in it. She was just, so you go, how the labs work is you have a week to do your scene. Basically, you rehearse it, then you shoot it, then you edit it, and then you show it to the kind of table of advisors that are there that week. And the advisors are usually just there for 1 week, right? And at that place, that's the place where filmmakers walk out of crying. And because, sometimes it's brutal. Like you thought you had it, and so Glenn Close, she was involved in it, and one thing that she was involved in was, no, I can't say that, but no, I think I'll put it like this, there was a kissing scene, and it was clear that one of the actors wasn't was hesitating about it, and she got mad about that. And I don't know what she said, but they went over in the corner and talked, and everything was fixed. But she did also say, I don't know if it's me, but
Cut the mic.
I don't. she also said, I don't know if it's me, but I don't know what the hell is being said in this movie. Yeah.
What is being said?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, it was a valid thing. It might have been sound. It might have been the dialogue,
Well, you talk about being the hype man for your movie, and I think probably nowhere is that more important than when you're trying to get financing, especially if you're making something that isn't like anything else in the marketplace, because we know that money people, they like to look at comps. They like to be like, okay, well, it's sort of similar to this, and it made this much money, so we can budget you at this. How do you convince people to do a film that isn't like anything else?
Yeah, it's. I mean, that is the question. That's the question that independent cinema is really facing right now, and in a very, very seismic way, and trying to deal with that, and trying to kind of push the envelope in certain ways, but satisfy models and satisfy the economics, is always going to be the kind of is going to be right now the sort of balance. I mean, and this is where streaming platforms can help. You know, I think that there's definitely a dialogue that is happening, which I think is very positive, which can help the nature of independent cinema, can also grow into the kind of limited release conversation, because, you know, I think independent filmmakers obviously need the financial support, and they need the platforms to get product out there, you know. And that the constraints on that have been kind of strangling independent film for so long. So the opportunity to push that out there so that we're not, you know, people aren't just box ticking, you know, in terms of their movie, it's just to get it made, and then limiting their own creative idea for their film. And so, you know, that's one of the things I was enthused by. I wanted to make a film that was set in Malawi, that is, a lot of the film is in Chichewa, and I was aware, you know, kind of into the process that a traditional model of that film isn't something that's gonna, that it would struggle to reach a kind of global market. It would struggle to get out there and get sort of eyeballs, and that was something that was sort of sobering initially. But as technology changes, and you know, and thereby as stories change, and things can be embraced for being different a little bit more, you know, it's positive. There's kind of a positive change, and I think that filmmakers are on the cusp of being able to look at their work, to engage in their work, to trust their instincts, and to go for it. And finances are becoming more comfortable with, you know, with ideas that are slightly more outside the box.
Boots, what might these people not know about getting money for your first film?
Well, what I had to do was a game of stone soup. Like, look at this soup we're cooking. You know, you want to put your ingredients in too, and then just keep dropping names of who's involved. So, you know, the first people to sign on to the movie, before I had even a producer, investors, that was David Cross and Patton Oswalt. I sent them the script. They were like, but couldn't get the movie made with just their names.
And they played the white voices in the movie.
Well, and I didn't even know what they were going to. They could have played one of the managers or whatever. Then we published it on McSweeney's as its own paperback book. And Dave Eggers gave it a seal of approval. So it kind of made it seem different. And then obviously, honestly, Sundance, being able to be like, you know, there's a myth that if you go through the labs, you're going to get into the festival. It's not true. But I did utilize that myth to my advantage when talking to investors. And then at that point, it's who's out there, there were different versions of this movie where other known actors had expressed interest in playing the lead, and you know that made a whole bunch of buzz happen. And then you know, when I cast Lakeith, he actually wasn't the Lakeith that he is now, as far as being in a bunch of big things. Like, there had been 2 episodes of Atlanta out, and so, but he was known to other actors, and I think it sent up a flare to other actors. And then Tessa Thompson, who I had written an email to a year before, and she had never responded. 2 weeks after I cast Lakeith, she was like, "I accept," and so yeah. Once, you know, in my case, it was about building people's trust, because you know, not only have I not done a film, I'm also considered a musician. So that seems like I'm doing it even in a more flippant manner than someone just even coming out of film school, because, you know, people feel like, oh, you're a rapper. Of course you want to make a movie. You probably want a clothing line too, and you probably want, you know, like, it's not taken seriously. So there are a lot of people that, you know, just to get people to click on the PDF to read it is hard. Like, you can get in contact with people, get people's information, but to get them to actually read it, that was hard. And that, for me, I did the old school Hollywood name dropping. I was hanging out with Chiwetel the other day. He said he really liked it.
You should never name drop. Mick Jagger told me that. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that distribution process, because once you've made the film, once you've gotten the acclaim, it has to get out there. And there's so many different ways for a film to get out there now. And we've got two great examples of that. Boots, your film was distributed by Annapurna. It did super well. Your film is about to be distributed by Netflix, which is a completely different scenario. What do you consider to be the upside of that?
Well, there are so many for me. Like I was saying, this idea of where I could see the film 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when I started making the film, when we sort of turned that corner and it was going into, it looked like it was going to start to work and we were going to get the financing. And knowing that I wanted to tell this global story, and I felt that this story had resonance, just across the globe, really. I really did, and I wanted to kind of pitch it in that way and push the film in that direction and open it up, And then that becomes a question. You start to speak to people and their opinions of how the film will live. And the reality is, you start to think that very sort of wide door gets narrower and narrower, and maybe you'll reach a few people with your film, and it's a worry, It's definitely a concern, and and then the sort of Netflix model started to just arrived and just started to grow into this cinematic capacity, and that's been growing and that's changing, and we're we're dealing with it and we're thinking about it in real time as that's changing and involving itself much more in the in cinematic distribution. So for me, that was an extraordinary opportunity, and for this film and for the reach of this film, it's something that I couldn't even have got my head around, this idea that of just having the opportunity of showing the film to 150 million people or whatever is just so staggering and right in the pocket of what I'm trying to say with this film and what I'm trying to reach with this film, So I just have this sense that it's obviously product dependent, and obviously those things have to be curated for what you're trying to express and what you're trying to say and what your film is trying to do and who it's trying to reach. But I feel like the days of a kind of blanket, well, I just want as many people to see it as possible for no real reason, but just that it's more cash in the bank or whatever, I think they're gone. I think you've sort of got to feel like, well, why do I want this to go on this platform? Or if I want it to be a smaller independent film that maybe has an increasing reach to people who are drawn to it, who are interested in it, and so on, like, why do I think that my film works in that capacity and not this capacity, and so on? And I feel like that's an exciting conversation to develop about how we distribute films and the kinds of films we want to distribute and why.
Well, one of the things you just mentioned about reach is something I want to talk to Boots about, because I feel like one of the advantages to having a film like this on Netflix is that you don't have to sweat international distribution. You know that as soon as that goes on Netflix, anyone in any country can watch it. And Boots, I know you ran into one of the sad realities of theatrical film distribution, which is it is hard to get a film with black leads, to get a distributor in the UK or various territories in Europe or really in a lot of places.
Yeah, but and I want to say that there were people. There's an article where there were distributors in Europe specifically making comments about Sorry to Bother You, how basically like because it has black people in it, there's nobody here that would want to see that, right? And we proved them to be full of shit because Universal distributed in the UK. And it was like in the top 10 movies for a while, and has done well there, and is about to come out in France next week. Of course, it would have done better had it come out at the same time as here, when all the stuff was building up. So, but my only problem with streaming platforms, I'm very much about like. I want to know how many people I'm reaching, I want to know. Like, I've spent all this time on this. How many people saw my movie? I want to, and you know, and that just that little thing. That's the thing that bothers me. I want to know. Did 10 people see it? Did 10 million people see it?
Between that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhere in there. Cool.
So, but I mean, I think you can. Yeah. So that it has the ability to be seen, and actually, I've heard like some directors like say, well, they tell me verbally what it is and all that, so you should make sure.
Well, I mean, data analysis is not my.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's cool, though. I mean, if that's important.
Yeah, because I'm looking at it. One of my main motivations, you know, it comes out, I think, in an artistic way, but you know, it's kind of like Cassius in the film. Is I want to know if what I'm doing mean anything, right? And what does that? And how do I decide that? And for me, it's about the cultural ripples I can cause. And I want to know what those are. So.
But I think you can feel that in the platform. I don't think it's necessarily just located to the numbers, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know exactly how many people saw Sorry to Bother You, but I know it's a massive part of the cultural conversation, you know?
Before I open it up for questions, I just have one more question for Boots. Boots, with your first film, you've proved yourself to be a masterful, savvy chronicler of the surreal and the absurd. So how's award season been?
Yeah, it's been a little surreal because you'll be sitting in a room with a bunch of folks, and you know you're like, oh, Indiana Jones is sitting right over there, and yeah, and you forget you're not watching TV, like, you know, like that's it's pretty cool to be able to meet folks. I got to meet Alfonso Cuarón. You know, through all of this whole ride has been that, like, being able to meet people who you artistically admire, and you know, and have conversations about making art with them.
And is that one of the ways that you can tell that your art is rippling through the right people?
Oh, I don't know, but you know, it feels good when, like, Alfonso Cuarón, this is name dropping, is saying like, oh, you did Sorry to Bother You, cool. I don't know whether he really saw it, but it sounded like he might have, but you know, like, yeah, that definitely, that feels good. But yeah, no, I think the other way that I feel the ripples is like, I go speak at colleges a lot, and there's a lot of young filmmakers that are like, wow, I didn't know I could make a movie like this. And this has changed what I think about what I do, so.
Well, let's take a few questions right there. The mic's coming.
Hi, this has been a fantastic panel. My name's Jamie Walker. How you doing, Boots?
Hey, what's happening?
I'm a writer-director also from the Bay Area, finishing my MFA at USC in TV and film production. And Chiwetel, I know that you've done adaptations in the past, and most recently you've talked about your process with adapting books into feature films. And currently I'm adapting a feature film about Oscar Micheaux into a television series. And so I wanted to know if you could talk. It also won the pitching contest here at Sundance in 2013. Yay. But I wanted to know if you could talk more about your process as an actor and how you go about preparing for a role, and more specifically, how did you prepare for 12 Years a Slave? Like, what was your process like for that?
Yeah, it was for that. It you know, I think it's always working out really how to prepare. You know, is what always changes, kind of role to role, to think about how you're thinking about the part, that kind of meta way of thinking. And so with 12 Years a Slave, it was pretty all-encompassing because there was a sort of physical dynamic to it, but then there was also the historical dynamic, the research dynamic. There was a book that was there that Solomon Northup had written, so there was all of that. There was the kind of cross-referencing. There was being in Louisiana and trying to get to the different places where some of the events happened. And so there was a kind of all-encompassing quality to it. And I felt that that was a very, very rich experience for me. And actually, it's what I wanted to bring to everything else that I did artistically, you know. And certainly into writing and adapting, you know, exactly in that territory that you're talking about, is trying to figure out how to get as holistic an experience of a book as you possibly can before you can really sort of write a word of it. You know, you've sort of got to be as much inside it, if not more, than the author. You know, in a certain way, and really be able to kind of match that way of thinking about it. You know, which is challenging, obviously, but it's but I like that. I like the fact that acting is a very good training, or, you know, at least can accompany that sense of thinking about things in that sort of total holistic way that is really important for writing.
Was it tricky to toggle between acting and directing on The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind?
It was tricky in the sense of it's weird saying cut in the middle of a scene. You know, like it's a weird thing, but also not wanting anybody else to say cut on the set because you don't know, and no one else really being comfortable with saying cut, because, you know, I just want to be sure that I have everything that I want to have, and even if that means rolling the camera or going again straight away, whatever you want to do as the director, but then at a certain point, having to step out of the character and being like, okay, that's that, you know, that was a sort of weird transition. There's also the thing that a lot of people talk about who do that, who act in their own films, and it's a strange thing, but it's true, you know, about feeling slightly awkward about having a few takes, you know, and having to really get over that, you know, and be able to say, listen, I'm going to go again, and I know that we're running out of time and the sun's going down, and, you know, and all of these things, but I'm going to take off that hat, and I'm actually just going to concentrate on being an actor right now, and being comfortable doing that, you know. Those are the sort of balances, you know.
I got a question for you.
Oh, yeah.
So what I've noticed, you know, in the casting process, I looked at a lot of British actors that just got on TV and stuff, and they've all, like, been very heavily trained. Like, if you get your first acting job on TV, most of them have been through, I don't know, whatever, which one did you go to? What school?
The London Academy.
Okay, see, the London Academy. You know, like, but here, you know, there seems to be other avenues, like somebody got in a film, or they played in a lot of music videos, or they're a musician, or something like that. Do you feel a big difference when you're, like, in a good or a bad way, when you, like, people are trained in different ways, they got whole different approaches than that whole sort of British school of acting, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's
do you all get together and talk shit about American actors?
We do not. Not at the London Academy. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I loved about the training that I had and the theater training that I had, and one of the things that I think is really good is that when I was a teenager and into my early 20s and stuff, I was, you know, you're trained to do just a kind of range of different things, you know. So, and in a way, that's what I thought acting was, you know. So you go out and you just do as many different kind of, you know, you play as many different kinds of parts as you humanly can, and you collect all of these different experiences, and, you know, and some of them you do really well, some of them you don't do so well, but that's part of the whole kind of muscle, building the muscle of being an actor, and that's where. That's what you're trained to do. That's what the theater is about, and then that's what people go into in film, and, you know, and so your idols are Daniel Day-Lewis, and you're, you know what I mean, you're in that kind of world of trying to get this sort of range, and America works, you know, American acting often works very differently to that, and which becomes very specific, and it's very internal, and people are very specific about the thing that they do, and they communicate it very, you know, the good and the great actors communicate that very beautifully, and it's very in the pocket, you know. So it's a big difference. And when I first came over to the States, I found myself kind of a little bit out of place and envious of a slightly different tradition that happens here in America. And then at other times, I felt like, oh, because I am trained to have this range, I actually can, I have some advantages because then I can work in sort of different capacities with a bit more ease than some people who are slightly more narrow in the way that they range their acting. So, you know, that's a big difference. I don't know if that's changing necessarily. I know that in a way that has often given an advantage to British actors in a way because they feel confident to go into completely different areas and, you know, they're just not sort of, that's what they're trained to do in a way.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. Let's make it juicy right here.
Here, go.
No, it's okay.
All right. So, talking about name dropping real quick, I wouldn't have gotten in if it weren't for you, Boots. They were trying to stop me at the door, but I said, I'm with Boots. They walked me up to the front. So yeah, my name is Bon Collet. I'm a producer, produce film and television. Name drop again. I produced a film starring John Malkovich called Dominion. Thank you. And first directorial debut, Steve Bernstein. You all know him as a DP, but he shot Dominion, and Dominion is about Dylan Thomas, a famous poet. Question: you talked about going to a very prestigious school in London. I noticed in America, if you go to a very prestigious school, Juilliard, the doors seem to be pretty much open a little easier too. So in America, it's a little bit more broad. You have people who are like, you know, hip hop artists to like scientists or whatnot and come to Hollywood and make it happen. But the question is, in UK, is it that all of the actors have to be thoroughly trained as you? Or is it like in America when you're dealing with UK and the UK industry?
Yeah, I think the tradition in the UK is to train. You know, is to go through the drama school process into the theater process. You know, that was definitely when I was starting out. That was like route one. That's what everybody's saying to you. You know, get into one of the drama schools, then get into like, you know, the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre, do shows there for a while, and then maybe you can do a little bit of television here and there on the side just to get the mortgage, you know, get the rent paid, and then maybe one day, you know, you might be able to do movies, and that's. I mean, I don't know if it's still like that. It was like, I mean, I'm going back a little bit, but that was, you know, the way that I went into the industry. That's certainly the way that my peers in the UK went into the industry. You know, I don't know. That's certainly the way there. Yeah.
Who was there at the same time as you?
Well, David was in the year above. David Oyelowo was in the year above me at drama school, and you know his film is playing right now. You know, so you know there were a few people around that time and some people went into, some people went into theater and didn't feel like making the move into television and. You know, there's a slightly different construction in the way that all of the things are sort of thought about and played out. And it took me a while to think about film. I never thought about being in film or being in television when I was starting out. I wanted to be an actor, and that was, you know, and that was that. And then I got tempted into this. All right.
All right, everybody, let's have some applause for our guests. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.